So it's week 6 or 7. I don't know. I can't keep track of this stuff. We're talking about transfer of learning plans today. And where else do you transfer learning but the main library at the Ohio State University? That's right behind me. And behind that, right over my other shoulder, is out on the oval. It is like this gorgeous fall day. Students are everywhere. And I just love this time of year. I love being on campus. I wish you all were too. I wish we were in person, but you're not. So I'm trying to bring it to you. I hope the shadow is not too bad. I'm seeing some reflection, but let's jump in. Just a quick overview of transfer of learning and how you devise those plans as you're putting together educational programming. So, quick, what is transfer of learning? Transfer of learning, transfer of knowledge. We've heard these terms. They are theoretical constructs, of course, and they are pretty simple to realize or to put into real life terms. It's how do your students, your participants, your adult audiences, whoever they are, apply what they've learned in the training program that you're creating or that you've created. It's not appropriate or really needed to go into detail in some certain learning situations, but it's especially needed when you're doing skills-based learning. So I gave the example a couple weeks ago about a nursing lecture versus hands-on training. You want that person drawing your blood if they've never done hands-on work or so you see where I'm saying transfer learning, applying what you know. Here are a couple of questions that are key to thinking about transfer of learning in our work, and as we're designing this early in the process, as we're designing the educational programs. First, how can we ensure that participants actually learn what was intended, basic stuff, no surprises, and then how can we ensure that they'll be able to apply it in their personal work or public lives, wherever that may be, that they need this information. If it's an industrial training program, I've brought up those examples. If it's a nonprofit training for compliance that has to be done, how can they apply it? How do we make sure we do that? So, unfortunately, since the 80s, transfer of learning, the Harvard Business Review article on this, shows that it's about 10% of what is conveyed is actually transferred into learning and knowledge. So the sponsoring organization, that could be your employer if you work for Extension or a for-profit business and you're doing training, but that organization and the participants want the outcomes to be practical and to be able to apply them to make a difference. Think adult learning theory. Knowles, 68 is when Knowles actually first wrote about andragogy, and then 84, 85, he started revising. Anyway, billions of dollars are spent on training. There's a really cool example that shows a disconnect from the American Medical Association. Planes flying overhead. And it's fascinating. It's 20 minutes. But just watch the first 4 or 5 minutes, and you'll get the idea. It's about health literacy and transferring learning, and it shows how some medical professionals don't realize the disconnects that their patients are having as they give instructions, say post-op, to take home and to take their meds in a certain way, or change their wounds, or whatever, or change their dressings, however that may be. So it can be really difficult and a critical safety issue. So depending on what you're teaching, this can be one of your biggest points that you really need to work on. So the model, this is out of the book Caffarella and Defron. Transfer of learning considers the planning process itself. So that's half of the semester that we're talking about, planning programs. What are your characteristics? What are the characteristics of your learners, and what's motivating them? Is it post-surgery where they're intrinsically motivated to get better, or extrinsically motivated for their wound to heal, whatever that may be? How do you design and deliver? What's the context? Again, back to Knowles' adult learning theory. That's all I'm going to talk about all semester. You get that? Because it's so immediate, and so that construct is so spot on with so much of our learning as adults. What's the environment? How do we eliminate barriers? One of the things that's the more complex your scope is, or your goals, the larger the number of people, the greater the magnitude of change that you're wanting to affect, the less control you have as a planner over those organizational and societal forces. So the more difficult it is, and the less control you have, the more difficult it will be. to boil down to transfer of learning. I'll give you a couple of examples on how to do some things to check transfer of learning here at the end of this video. So all these variables can make it really difficult. We have to address those, and we do that in our program planning process. That's the key. So framework, really quickly. Timing, when you do it. What are the variety of strategies you can use, and then who are the key people. So when it can be done before, during, or after. After can be the most effective, kind of when you're done, but there's the drawback, because don't forget, people are walking out the door. They're done. So you have to kind of be careful and balance that if you don't leave time. And I'll give you a couple of those minute papers and things here in just a minute to talk about some things that you can actually use. Most useful in assessing learners' ability to apply or applying these can help. Allow the learners to be part of the planning process. So now we're back to our inputs in the planning process itself, and inviting our participants, co-constructing the program with them. It's really powerful. And to think about the power dynamic that I've talked about a time or two as well. We are sharing that. That increases transfer of learning. It increases participation, buy-in, motivation, all sorts of things. And then sharing the learning plan. So metacognition here, we're talking about involving the learners and stakeholders so they understand what you're trying to get at, and they understand how learning works. So it all starts to play together. You see how these concepts and constructs are starting to come together as we do this and as we move forward. And then the key people. You may be designing a program that somebody else is going to train or instruct. So if you can include them or people who have had experience in a similar program, that can really help you understand and avoid some pitfalls that they've already encountered. And so those are just things to think about as you're doing it. Here's an example from, you guys know OSU Drake Institute for Teaching and Learning? I'm actually a faculty fellow there. Short plug for the Drake. But they have, and I'll give you 3 quick ones here, examples of things that you can do after your program is done to do a short evaluation and to do a check on transfer of learning. So first, the minute paper. And these guys are flying low today. I don't know. They're probably looking at all the students out on the open and thinking, what a beautiful day to swoop over you. Anyway, so decide what part of the course you want to focus on. Maybe you want to know how well students understood that lecture or last week's homework, whatever it is. Then use a couple of basic questions. What's the most important thing you learned during this class? What important question remains unanswered? So an inverse question, but really powerful, because then, and you can do index cards, scraps of paper, anonymous online, or use Poll Anywhere, or Poll Everywhere, any of those. Once you review the responses, you'll have input, you'll have insight as to what might be a disconnect, and then you can discuss that with your students, answer questions, clarify, and cement learning, which is what our objective is. Another example from Drake, 1-sentence summary, pretty concise thing. Select the topic that you've covered, something you want to do a check on, an eval on, and then as quickly as they can, have them write down or answer the who, what, when, where, why, how in relation to that topic. And then challenge it. And here's the example there, Cinderella, in the story Cinderella. Who mistreats Cinderella? What did they do? When did they do it? Where does the story take place? How does the mistreatment manifest? And then why the nefarious, people who are doing this, the stepmother, whoever it was. And then have them put those into a sentence. So now their brain is doing an additional step of constructing from these elements, and that can be pretty powerful. You look at those and you'll have an idea of whether or not that learning has transferred, of whether or not your program worked. And then one last one, the muddiest point. I like this one. At the end of the lecture, discussion, reading, excerpt, whatever it may be, just ask the students, take a couple minutes. What's the muddiest point? Respond to their feedback as soon as you possibly can and help them to see and understand it. So changes, just the last from Caffarel and Defferon. So they include in the chapter some brief descriptions in a couple of the modules that may be used for design or to assess transfer of learning. Transfer system inventory, return on investments, ROI kind of stuff, states of concern models. So take a look at those. Interesting additional stuff. And good luck with your programs and your delivery and with making it stick. From the Oval, I hope you get up here, walk around on a beautiful day on campus. See you next week.